So I'm very happy to have David Karandish, founder of Capacity, Ali Al-Jabri, founder of Quamer, and Chris Cont. Did I say that right, or was it Contes?
Contes, but that's okay.
Chris Contes, founder of Bolto. And, thank you so much for joining Startup Week, joining EQ to talk about AI and, this kind of emerging sector in St. Louis. And, the first question I just wanted to go into is, AI is about nuance, context, and entity recognition. Can you sort of talk about those three values in the context of what you do at your company? And we'll start with David.
Sure. Thank you for having me here this morning. In terms of nuance, one of the things that we've seen is that when you've got either a customer or a team member that has a burning question, the ability to not only answer the question, but to give them the confidence around, here's why we answered this question the way that we did. Here's how we came to that conclusion. Here's where we sourced that answer from, allows people to have the confidence in the answer that comes out of the other end. And so, classic example, you could take your policies and put them into a knowledge base and ask questions into them. But if you had your 1990 policy and your 2020 policy, most bots would just come back to you with an answer regardless of where it came from. We view contextualization as a big portion of coming back and saying, hey, here's where you got the answer from, here's why we gave you this answer, and here's a feedback mechanism to help provide any thumbs up, thumbs down kind of feedback to help improve that for next time. In terms of entities, we talked a lot about how natural language processing is really good with strong intent and really difficult on the margin. So an example we use internally, if somebody said, what are the guidelines for an FHA loan? And somebody else said, what are the guidelines for a VA loan? Syntactically, grammatically, for my lexicon friendly folks on the Zoom here, those are very similar questions. But you have to be able to know that those two entities, while related, mean you're going to get a totally different document you're going to search from, a totally different place you're going to go. Being able to pull out those entities and understand what you actually meant by what you said, not just doing a word comparison, is so important for the results to be trusted and to be valued by your customers and team.
Yeah, and Capacity is doing a lot of its kind of entity recognition and getting all its contextual signals from sort of text and like file structure, right? Or are there any other areas you're getting those signals?
Yeah, so we kind of think of the three sources where your company intelligence lives. It's your apps, it's your documents, and it's your people. And so
Okay.
we kind of structure it as we want to go connect to as many apps as possible within your ecosystem and open RESTful APIs make that happen. We want to be able to mine content out of your documents and in fact start to treat your documents more like a database over time, in ways they can be queried, they can be accessed, et cetera. And then ultimately what we want to do is crowdsource the wisdom of your team and bring that into the knowledge base with all the top frequently asked questions that people have, either from a customer facing side or an internal team member side.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. That was a really good primer. So Chris, what Bolto's doing, is doing that with speech, right? So how are you using, so you're recognizing what's happening in a sales call and giving real-time coaching by monitoring phone calls. So how's Bolto using nuance, context, and entity recognition?
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's unlike what Capacity is doing. I think we have a layer on top of it where we're taking the audio and turning it into text, and then we can run the analysis on the text. But basically, what Balto is doing is it's understanding conversations as they're happening. It's looking for all kinds of signals within the conversation, and some of the signals can be like a hard skill, like a set of words, or a soft skill like active listening or talking too fast. And based on what it's hearing, it is categorizing all these different signals, both on the customer side and on the sales rep side. And based on what it's hearing, it gives suggestions. And then in the back end, similarly, we have hundreds of sort of what we call AI library items, which are sets of rules and things that Balto can reference to infer ultimately the type of suggestion that it's going to give. So it's not unlike probably what others are doing. We have obviously an element of audio because there's phone calls involved, but the same fundamental elements of categorization, listening to the context of the situation, and then providing a recommendation is fundamentally similar, it sounds like.
Yeah, cool. And Ali, same question to you. You've got more of a kind of hyperlocal data element to all of this. So can you explain what additional context, nuance, and entity recognition that creates?
Yeah. I think what's important for us is really understanding where we're mapping, where we're building these 3D maps that are mainly indoor or on-site on a specific private property, and really understanding how much of the mapping has already been done, right? So I think the context for us really lies around movement, how like I'll use a mine as an example because that's probably the most cutting edge one. When you're working the mine, obviously you're digging into places you don't know where you're going, right? So using these wearables and the Bluetooth gateways that we work with, we kind of build an AI intelligence around, like, it's sort of like, I don't know, that scene in Batman where you're mapping out some buildings and knowing where people are. So it really is similar to that level because people are going up ladders and they're normally like making the most of the whole environment allowed. So that kind of makes it easier for us because the context there is 100% understanding the 3D map of where the employees are and knowing, and also adding additional layers of data like incident, like I know somebody falls off a ladder because they fainted because of heat. So we can then put tags onto areas where there's high heats and loud sounds. So stuff like that really helps us give as much situational awareness when people have to find unactive team members, right? So that's really the context that we apply. That algorithm, though, is really what does the heavy lifting. And as time moves, it becomes smarter because it knows exactly certain behaviors and can also adjust uncommon behaviors, right?
So I love what the three of you said, and a theme between what you're all saying is around discovery. So AI's like the biggest role is in discovery, and you kind of have to use the what you know element to discover what you don't know, and essentially create all these libraries. And I think probably the thing that's not necessarily clear to people who don't do AI is these libraries are custom, right? So they're not just custom to your company, they're actually custom to the client you might be working on. So for instance, Ali, in your case, it's like you're just learning a lot about a specific location, presumably on behalf of a client. And Chris, you're kind of documenting what's happening, the sales conversations just in a company. So actually, you as founders of companies using AI are actually really helping people discover things about their own company rather than building a kind of answer for everyone. Would you agree with that? You can nod or shake your head. Okay, cool. So, David, with that in mind, what are the kind of things that, you've been able to discover? What's the kind of nuance between your clients, for instance? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so a couple things that we've learned along the way. One is that the user experience is just as important as the AI itself. You have a fantastic AI, but if you don't have a great UX, you're not going to get the results you're looking for. And so things that have frankly very little to do with AI, but a lot with the user experience, things like adding autocomplete as you start typing, will actually preview the types of things that capacity can match to. Now you can always type in whatever you want, but when we rolled out autocomplete, go figure, our match rates went up, our customer sat went up, and we just started creating a better experience. Another principle that we like to employ is this idea around clarification. And so in our tech stack, when you go and you type something in, capacity is going to go generate a bunch of potential matches for what it thinks you meant. We then have all these algorithms voting in an ensemble on what those matches should be. That score is above a certain threshold, we go ahead and match. If it's below a certain threshold, we'll go route that off to either a live chat agent or to a ticket. And if it's in between, we'll come back and clarify, say, did you mean A, B, or C? And if you select B, we'll actually remember that going forward for next time. And so we try to employ as many human-centric design principles in terms of clarification, in terms of contextualization, in terms of actually knowing who the user is and the nuances of what that user has access to, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I've heard that, you know, AI, to do AI well, you have to kind of gamify the data collection and sort of try and be as invisible as possible. So people don't necessarily know that they're sort of emitting AI useful signals. Chris, you're nodding. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the rule of thumb we use at Balto is, you know, all conversations are about 80, particularly in a sales context, 80 to 85% the same. It doesn't matter really what you're buying. If someone says, I don't want to talk to you, or I don't have money for that, or I'd like to buy it, like there isn't much nuance around it. It is the last 15% though, or so, where specific customizations for each customer become relevant. In Balto's case, in every instance in which Balto is being used, there is a real agent on the customers, or our customers have real call center agents who are using Balto to guide them. So if Balto is not sure about something, it just won't do anything, and you're back to what you had before you bought Balto, which is a call center. So our downside is sort of the baseline of what was there before. And what we found is, so long as Balto gives a few really impactful suggestions in each conversation, that will, on balance, lead to a huge uptick in performance, because our customer, you know, we sell to people that have hundreds or thousands of agents. So these things accumulate. So I was just nodding to the point of, yes, it's, you know, the 85% can be trained across all of the millions of calls that Balto has analyzed. And then it's that last 10 or 15% that is specifically customized in each individual rollout with each new client.
Yeah, so between kind of, you know, what you and David said there, there's this role of making suggestions and nudges. And I want to go back to that. But Ali, in a way, from what you were saying around the way your AI works in terms of discovering things through like sound or someone falling off a ladder, tragic events and things like that, you know, in an odd way, that's making suggestions and nudges to how to modify your maps, right?
Yeah, definitely. And also there's a human aspect that feeds the AI, or a manual aspect that's kind of crowdsourced through the employees that feeds the AI by knowing, hey, these are loud areas, right? Because we're not actually measuring the sound. That would be really crazy in terms of Big Brother. So so like we use tags, and we have these like prompts where, think of it this way, we have like people who give like who have run-throughs to make sure that the data is accurate, and we have like quick action points that could take them like 10 minutes to do in their specific areas of work that validates it's kind of like CAPTCHA. Think of it as like CAPTCHA for mapping out areas, right? Because like they kind of get that, hey, is this really true of this area? And that kind of allows us to build an accurate data point. And that's something that we learned as we started doing this, right? So I think the mixture of automating and using our AI for that, and then manually validating has really made us effective, which I can relate to what Chris said in the 85% kind of thing, right? And that's really what's been exciting for us, learning this as we go.
Yeah. So, you know, there's this kind of training the AI part of that's essential to building your businesses. But then also, you know, as David said, there's like this UX issue in the long run where you have to kind of, yeah, make suggestions and nudges to get better performance in a way out of the AI and make it more useful to humans. So, you know, how do you kind of find the line between training the AI and the AI training the human? David?
Yeah, I think that those lines increasingly blur. Where, you know, when we do a training session with a client, we're both collecting training data from the clients, and we're also training the client on how to use the AI. And the more we've done it, the better the product has gotten, the less we're having to train the client because it's more natural and intuitive. But no, I think that those are increasingly go hand in hand.
Right. Anyone want to chime in on that? Okay, well, don't worry. That kind of goes into, you know, one of my other questions around sort of talent and developing the St. Louis ecosystem. You know, obviously everyone's terrified of AI taking our jobs, but what, you know, my question, and, you know, there's reason to be skeptical about that. Certainly when you give, you know, consider what you guys have said, which is you still have to train the AI. So what jobs do you think AI is going to create? And particularly in St. Louis?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So, you know, obviously there will be a lot of engineering positions, software engineers, ops, DevOps people, and those types of jobs. That's a clear win. But where there are places that I think people underestimate are roles like data trainers, app connectors, right? So we have folks who don't necessarily have a computer science degree, maybe have a little bit of application training, who are connecting third-party APIs up to capacity in a low-code, no-code type of environment. And what we found is that this is one of our most important roles within the organization, because when we go to a client and they say, hey, we want capacity to work with all these different systems, that integration piece is huge. The training piece around how we get up to speed on a particular market or category, particularly if we go into a new one, is so important. And so I think those are some of the roles that don't get talked about a lot in terms of what are going to be up and coming over the next few years.
Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think you can sort of answer that question on different levels. I think there's the way I sort of view it personally is that societies in which high levels of innovation are occurring tend to produce the most amount of wealth for the most amount of people and tend to be the most desirable societies to live in. That's not uniformly true, but I think it's directionally correct. And so for me, you know, when the question about, you know, AI and jobs, the real question is like, do we want to build something that moves forward, like that builds something really special and new and is like innovative and interesting? I think if we like work in that direction, the solution then to like create jobs around that is much easier than the reverse, which is like, do we just want to stagnate a little bit? Those tend to be like, and I think candidly, we all feel it in St. Louis a little bit, like the costs of stagnation and what that does for jobs. So I think it's a tricky, and these are sort of, I guess, my viewpoints, not Balto's. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but like the question is often posed as like AI will take jobs, and it's like, but what is the alternative? We need to build something like St. Louis building something special and interesting and developing new industries. I think on balance will be better for jobs than an alternative, and that's my personal view.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're
so sorry. I don't know if that helps. I hope it does.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what you're getting at is, you know, AI is gonna maybe it'll get rid of low skilled jobs, but it's going to create potentially create higher skilled jobs and more interesting jobs. And I guess that's what I also see in kind of sort of Ali's examples. It's like, it might create more intrepid jobs where you need people to go into, investigate places or, documents or whatever it is, but you need kind of explorers to help train the AI.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, like thinking security and safety, like what we do, I know that a lot of cities, especially St. Louis, have like a drone pilot program for police force. So I think there will be a point where drones will automatic like be flying without any pilots, and then have, when an emergency or something is detected, require human verification. So I think that's like a job that a police officer never thought of, for example. But then as the future goes on, they're called, I don't know, emergency pilots, I don't know, emergency assist pilots or something like that, where it's not like they're always flying the drone to see what's going on. The drone automatically just flies over a certain area and detects things, and then is prompted by a pilot to take over. Sort of like 911, how people are getting calls and responding to them. Similar, but with drones, where they can even speak through a speaker and stuff of that nature, where automation will make their job way more efficient rather than take their job away. Kind of move them from doing the heavy, not the heavy lifting, but greasing their elbows, let's say, and focusing on really the value proposition of their jobs.
And that kind of leads into the question of skills, like, what skills should the city be developing, and what skills are you developing in your employees or looking for in your employees, knowing that a bunch of skills are also kind of solved by the AI. So, I'm specifically thinking it's like AI is becoming better and better at, as we know, recognizing entities, understanding context, and, interpreting enough nuance. But still, there's more interpretation that needs to be done. And that's what humans are better at than computers. So, yeah, do you kind of see like, is it going to create more thinking or less thinking? And how would you develop thinking in employees? So that might be a random question. Dave, does that resonate in any way?
Yeah. I mean, I think the history of software is a history of automation. And somebody asked me, what is software? Software, yes, it's technology, there's code, there's et cetera. But ultimately, I view it as it's a proxy for outsourced labor.
Yeah.
For if I wanted to make a spreadsheet, I'd have to get out a piece of paper, or maybe some graph paper, and draw columns and lines. And if I wanted to sort it, I'd have to throw it away and pick up a new one. And Excel comes out, and various Google Sheets, whatever. It just took away that time. It's not that, oh man, all this time we used to spend making spreadsheets is gone, and now nobody makes spreadsheets. I think we make a heck of a lot more spreadsheets now than we did before.
Yeah, right.
But we're able to do more higher order things with those spreadsheets. And I think you could apply that same concept or logic out to just about any form of technology. And
I guess that's sorry. Well, that's exactly what I was driving at and couldn't express. But you're right. There's this higher order thinking that's going to happen. So, will we find like more correlations between industries? Like, will there be sort of things two industries we can automate that we didn't realize were connected and things like that?
I think what we're going to find, yes, I think there will be correlations between industries, but I think what we're going to find is an inherent validation of a lot of the things that in retrospect will seem very intuitive.
Yeah.
But before you get to retrospect, you're like, oh, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. So as an example, we're working with a large university, and this university is trying to reduce the number of people who drop out. Good, noble goal for AI. Well, it turns out that if because of their online programs, they can actually look and see, what was your incoming GPA? Are you a first-time college student? Are you on a Pell Grant? Did you show up to your first 3 classes? Did you go to the syllabus page and click the button saying, I read the syllabus, right? Now, they can't actually prove you read the syllabus yet. Maybe they could do some scroll depth or something like that to simulate that. But conceptually, they have all these data points. And with those data points, it turns out that if your grades are slipping, or if you just didn't read the syllabus and what the class is, you're probably not that bought in, and you're a lot more likely to drop that particular class. And if you run that analysis across enough classes, we can actually predict your likelihood to drop out of the program. And so, I could ask someone, hey, do you think people who don't read a syllabus are going to be more likely to be confused or less likely to know what their expectations are in the class? Yes, of course. But the data, the AI actually unearthed the data to actually say how important that factor is, and what to do about the folks who don't do that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so it's confirming what we already know, but could never what we know intuitively, but could never really prove. And I guess, that actually takes me to Balto, because it's like the counter intuition with selling is actually the less you talk, the more likely you're going to actually close the business. So presumably you're measuring like talk time versus listening time. Are there any other kind of, obvious intuitions that you've been able to prove?
Yeah, I think that in the context of Balto, I think we sort of, I can speak very sort of in the weeds to selling specifically. The challenge with our customers is not that they don't know. There's lots of softwares out there that will tell you, hey, your reps who talk too fast don't sell as much. Like that is generally like well-established knowledge, and there's a lot of speech analytics softwares that will show you that in a dashboard, and we do too, because that's sort of like table stakes when you're in that world. I think what we found is that the challenge is actually changing behaviors of humans. If you have a call center of 2,000 people and 1,253 of them are talking too fast, how do you actually train 1,253 people to talk slower? You can pull them off, you can do group training, you can fire a bunch of them, which is inefficient and, like not really a desirable outcome. So Balto's value proposition, I think, is a little bit more around like, it's actually pretty obvious in many cases what you need to do to communicate more effectively. The challenge is getting people to do those things. And if you're in on a phone call and it's live in the moment, it's hard to remember the 8 rules of effective communication in that moment, and that's where Balto can contribute. So I think for us, it's more about enforcing the things we know to be true, as opposed to like discovering a new and radical insight about like the role of selling in a call center.
But Chris, that's just give us an example of one of those obvious things.
Sure. So it may not surprise you to find that active listening, in other words, sales reps who do a good job understanding the needs of their customers, which is represented in talking, letting situations in which customers talk the most actually lead to the most sales, not situations in which sales reps talk the most. That's a common mistake, but everyone knows the talkative sales rep, and that they can all remember the time that they didn't buy from that person, and it was actually the one who listened who they did. So things like that are areas where Balto can provide guidance.
Okay, I mean, I'll give you an example of one that I was thinking of is like in suicide prevention, completely random tangent, but in a lot of kind of therapy centers that are looking after people, going through a tough time, mirroring is a big part of it. So just repeating back what the person said, and the theory is people can't see themselves. So when you repeat back what they said, say they're expressing, something that happened, or they're in a dangerous moment in time, expressing it back to them they get to see themselves. So do you have things like that where maybe it's like you know, it says customer suggested this feature, why don't you repeat it back to them?
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of thing is sort of the bread and butter of Balto, which is like customer said this, what is the best thing you can say back? And sometimes it could be mirroring, sometimes it could be an open-ended question, sometimes it could be like asking them to explore further, it could be doing more discovery with them, it could be asking for the sale. Balto is, you know, we're training it on like that type of context, but what you're describing is yeah, pretty fundamental to the experience that Balto users have. Okay.
And what's interesting is, again, you know, in all cases, Balto and Capacity is you're like, yeah, you're finding these kind of obvious intuitions and validating them. And really what that's doing is kind of turning human experience into something sort of measurable and sort of visible in a public way that it wasn't before. Like it's moving it from subjective to objective. And then, you know, in a way, Ali, what you're doing as well with the mapping and your AI component is also capturing experience. So I guess my questions is like, you know, is that the new category of tech? Is all of this about sort of a new type of B2B experience?
I would say yes, because really, like, I think Chris opened a really good topic. Maybe it is related to AI, but it's something that I really believe in. So what I think one of our biggest success factors in garnering a lot of interest is because we don't change human behavior. So we focus on what employees already wear, for example. So that's why we created and have IP around our key wearable, which is a smart badge holder. Like if you look at the numbers, there's like 100 million plus employees in the US that wear a badge holder. So the training aspect kind of is not there at all, because you're just replacing a dumb accessory they already wear with a smart one. And that allows us to garner crowdsource internal data points that allows high scalability, right? So if I'm working with a safety or security professional, what's the first thing he's going to tell me? All the problems that Chris just mentioned, like I have to train 10,000 employees. Oh Lord, no, I'm not interested, you know? So until that understanding lies there. So I would say AI is the most effective when it can use some kind of human interaction to become smarter as it's a seamless vehicle, if that makes sense. And I think that's really where we have seen a lot of that come to life. Like I got the luxury of meeting Duolingo's founder, Luis von Ahn, who I'm a big believer of and fan of. And what he did was incredible use of AI, right, to crowdsource and then start doing these automated metrics of things that were not identified on Google Maps. And then Duolingo, the same thing, where he's translating words that are from libraries, and he quantified like, hey, if I was to translate Wikipedia, like with translators, it would cost, I don't know how many millions of dollars and how much time, but because of AI and human verification, we can do it in 3 months. So like, I think that's really the beauty of AI, and in conjunction with human interaction or human verification of some sort.
You know, one of the AI apps I've got excited about and recommend people use just to kind of see how incredible it is Picture This, where you can just take a photo of a plant and literally you can identify every type of plant in Forest Park. And it's so fast. And it even tells you, you know, oh, this one's diseased and, you know, and this is edible and things like that. And it's amazing, really, how much expert knowledge is managed to sort of bring back and simplify to someone like me who doesn't have any green thumbs at all, you know, and it sort of made me interested in understanding my environment in a new way. So I guess, you know, is there a point where so right now, you know, there's a certain amount of kind of stagnation that is to your advantage. You know, there are these patterns that haven't been disrupted that all three companies are able to sort of learn about faster than anyone else and identify kind of sort of opportunities and breakpoints within those industries. Like, is there a point where all the patterns get discovered? And is it only like 10 years away?
I'll take that one. I think discovering the pattern is 5 or 10% of the work.
Okay.
90 to 95% is actually implementing the pattern. So I'll give you two that we work with. When we think, I'll go back to that education example. So we think of any kind of large scale AI project in terms of three discrete phases. You have the descriptive phase, where you're effectively recording data in a centralized place in a consistent manner from all the data points that you want to collect. And that's not new, but it is not sufficient to have a well-running AI system, but it is definitely necessary. The second part is after the descriptive phase is you have the predictive phase. Okay, well, based on these factors, here's what we are likely to predict. So in that example here, if you didn't read the syllabus, we're going to predict you've got a high likelihood of dropping out. And we'll actually go feed new data points in to improve those predictions over time. But then the third phase is the prescriptive phase. Okay, now we have a student who we think might have some likelihood to drop out. What do we do about it? Do we send them a text? Do we call them? Do we send them an email? Do we try to arrange a physical in-person meeting, knowing that there's a cost to that if you have an online student? And those prescriptions are now ultimately the interventions, if you will, of what this particular higher education college wants to go implement. And so we kind of view you could take every AI project and put it into descriptive, predictive, prescriptive. The other framework that we use, I'll be quick on this, I don't want to hog the mic here, is framework we kind of pulled from Amazon, and we call it the Sassy Framework because we like cheesy analogies. But the Sassy Framework is, if you think about an Amazon experience, you've got self-serve, right? So anyone can go in, buy something. You've got anticipation. People bought this, a lot of automation behind the scenes to get that widget to your door in maybe even as short as a couple hours. You've got speed, right? So Amazon focuses on speed over just about any other metric. You have integration, so they're plugged into these different ecosystems, these different providers, these different products to make it an everything store. And then ultimately you've got escalation where you can drill up and drill down on whatever category you're in. And so we apply those same principles back to building an AI experience where, we want our customers to have a self-serve experience. We want it to anticipate their needs. We want to automate their workflows behind the scenes. We want it to be very fast. Want to integrate with all of their key apps, and then ultimately escalate up to a human as needed. And so we're happy to give away the pattern or the concept, and we're not the only people who figure this out. But the devil's in the details in terms of actually enacting the pattern or actually implementing these patterns. That's where you need vendors like everyone on this call.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I mean, what I also really like about it is this prescription phase, actually those are going to be some of the new jobs that AI creates. It's going to need a lot of people at the end of the AI kind of recording and predictive phase to then be the sort of, industry doctor, to work out what is the best plan for engaging these students Well,
and especially because those prescriptions don't all have an equal cost associated with them.
Right.
We could send an email that's pretty cheap to do, send a text that's still pretty cheap to do, calling someone's a little more expensive, meeting with someone in person is a little more so that someone who has straight A's, but they've got a C in physics, maybe they just aren't great at physics, and texting them the TA hours would be helpful. But someone who's got a C- average, whose grades are dropping, who hasn't read any syllabuses this whole semester, you might want to intervene a little heavier there.
Yeah, they may have reading issues that no one knows about, be dyslexic or something. Ali or Chris, do you want to kind of talk about, this prescriptive phase? I find that extremely exciting for talking about the future of work in St. Louis.
I can go. So like I think David said super eloquently kind of what I touched base on about like maybe not the three processes, but I agree with those three processes 100%. I think the prescriptive phase is probably where all the value happens because it's kind of like in our scenario, I like a term called just-in-time intervention. So like for us, that's really key. Let's use COVID-19 for example, like with contact tracing, like just knowing like when somebody gets that external data point that gets inserted, which is, hey, I'm positive for COVID-19, safety and HR and corporate security can immediately act upon that. And that could really save the company, one, a lot of money, and two, prevent potential outbreaks at the workplace. Like there's cases of workplaces that have at 10,000 employees contract COVID at their workplace. Yeah. So I think that like what the prescriptive phase for us is really where we are learning the most, because not only are we quantifying what we should do, but we're quantifying how much it can cost companies, which is why insurance companies, for example, are really interested in what we're working on, because they get to save a lot of claims and payouts because of those reasons. Everything from, I don't know, mass violence or internal incidents to external factors, heart attacks, stuff of those natures that at the end of the day affect the company, and it's also the company's legal and moral responsibility to address, right? So yeah. I think the prescriptive phase is definitely the area where the most impact will be generated in all these plethoras of industries, right?
One thing, just to jump in there, I'll totally agree with what Ali said on that, with one maybe slight tweak. I think the vast majority of the value is realized in the prescriptive phase, but to get to that value, the descriptive phase of just having a centralized, standardized way of recording all this data and looking at it is where people tend to run into more of the issues. And so if you can get through the descriptive phase well, the predictive and prescriptive phases should flow very naturally. A lot of companies, believe it or not, they're not stuck on phase 2 or phase 3. They're stuck on phase 1 of having clean data, of having data that's representative, of having data that can cover all the bases.
And is that the competitive advantage between, AI startups in the same industry? That, your competitor, for instance, like, do you just aim to be better at the descriptive phase than a competitor? Is that the key advantage?
I think. Go ahead, David.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think to the question of can startups be more competitive in that area? I don't know if we can necessarily make the data better, but I think we have an advantage of being able to go narrower. We compete with companies that have been around for 20 years, so they have huge product suites and do everything sort of okay. But because we can say, we're going to focus on insurance of this rep size only, and we can still sustain our growth rate just in that particular area, it's easier then to create better data and a more accurate, more focused AI. So I think, but I don't know if that's unique to artificial intelligence. That might just be an advantage of being a younger tech company going up against incumbents in the space. You can not necessarily make the data cleaner, but you can select a narrower set of data in which to build off of. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a bit of an uncanny valley that lies in between going very narrow or very wide. You either have to be narrow enough that you're focused on a very specific problem where you can drill to the center of the earth on, or you need to be open enough as a platform that you can plug into enough data sources to actually make a difference. It's the middle where you're not narrow enough, but your platform is not sufficiently developed, where I think some folks get tripped up.
And I guess, these moments of interventions and nudges, that essentially all your platforms are creating, but they're creating for specific clients. Like, who owns that? Is there a point where, people are watching what all the nudges and interventions that a company makes, and that becomes like competitive information? the more employees we have being intervened by, you know, AI software in their job, does there become a point where it, you know, you could create a kind of corporate spy kind of role that's like, you know, telling competitors when they get nudges and things like that, and what kind of nudges they get, and who owns that?
I think the analogy I would make is sort of like, well, I guess Bill Belichick isn't necessarily a good example anymore because he's having a tough season. But like, you can go look at a great coach and write down everything the good coach does. It doesn't mean that you can then go take it back to your team and replicate those things. I think like you could probably record Balto giving suggestions all day, all night, and then take it back to your company and try to replicate that. And I don't, maybe the other founders feel this way too. But like, there is, you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg in the framework that allows those types of things to exist. I think in the high level, though, the risk you're describing is valid, which is like over time, things become commoditized, and like the secret, awesome secret sauce that you have today at some point will probably be a lot more accessible to other people. But I don't necessarily think that I think it can be perceived as more simple to replicate than it is, at least in like the short or the medium term.
Okay, yeah. So actually we got a question from the audience. How does one know what to instrument, or what to instrument to collect data in the descriptive phase when one hasn't yet understood what issues exist to be discovered? Let me repeat that. What instrument should you use to collect data during the descriptive phase if you don't understand what issues exist in the first place? How do you know which instrument to use?
I'll start out using that earlier example on the education client. They didn't know what was going to be important, but they were able to walk through what was the experience of signing up as a student and attending your class, registering, signing up for the syllabus, logging on to your first session. These were all data points that happened along the journey. And so they said, okay, well, rather than recording all of those data points in separate systems, let's centralize that into one data store, have it write those events every time you do one of those things. And now we've got a description of, you know, what's happening on that particular flow. Now they can then pair that up with the outcome that they're looking to measure around, okay, well, did this person complete this class or not? Did this person graduate or not? And then you put the model on top of it and you say, okay, well, it turns out these were important factors, these were less important. These were important under these scenarios, these are important under these other scenarios.
To that end, unless anyone wants to speak to the instrument stuff, you know, people talk about like one day, like, you know, people, even ophthalmologists are like, AI is gonna, in the future, AI is going to diagnose like all these like eye care conditions, and you're not gonna need an ophthalmologist. And like, yeah, sort of detection in breast cancer and things like that is being done quicker than AI. And even like doctors and lawyers who are like, you know, are sort of elite professional class, you know, some of the most stable jobs in society, you know, are worried that AI will replace them someday. But, you know, it sounds like there's a lot of kind of human understanding around not just interventions, but like where there's kind of collisions between two different prescriptions. So, you know, a doctor right now will, you know, the role of a doctor, if anything, is like to make sure that they know what drugs you're taking for one thing, and that there's no like negative drug interaction for solving another separate issue. And just from what you said, David, just then, it's like, it sounds like, again, that human role at the end of the prescriptive layer and the new types of jobs that are going to emerge are people who understand, you know, this prescription is not going to work in this case, and conflicts with this one. And that's kind of the expertise that's people are gonna need to create.
Yeah,
Someone said it was a great panel, by the way. They've had to leave.
I think I would say that over time, people become more counselor-esque across their roles.
Right.
But you won't need the ophthalmologist to tell you you've got glaucoma, but you'll have a person to help. Yeah, I don't want to talk to a bot if I just found out my eyes are falling out or something like that.
Right, exactly. You nailed it.
I'm totally fine asking a bot, what's the routing number at my credit union, or what hours is this restaurant open? I have no problem with that. My eyes are falling out. I want to talk to a person because I personally believe the placebo effect is real, and that just talking with someone can make someone feel better. So I think you'll end up with these roles where the technology will do a lot of the diagnosing and even some of the prescriptive options. But then you'll have a professional who's effectively counseling you through what those options look like.
Like an economy of care is going to sort of emerge.
Yeah.
Definitely. In fact, I'll sidetrack. The reason we actually named the company Balto was after a sled dog. And we were playing on that relationship of the musher and the dog working together. You have the human who will be useless in a snowstorm without a lead sled dog. And you have a lead sled dog that will probably be useless without the human on the back of the sled. But together they can, and this is a true story, like go across the Alaskan tundra and deliver medicine successfully. And to David's point, like the eye care example is interesting. We do have use cases where Balto will flag situations where, like if a nurse prescribes 2 medicines over the phone that conflict, Balto can flag that in the moment. On its own, that's probably not helpful. You don't want the robot telling you what medicines to use, but a human could probably make a mistake too and misprescribe something. So it's that relationship they have together where it's actually special and interesting and like impactful.
I love that. It's like this care economy, or just ontological sort of economy. And I guess, like Ali, that's kind of also part of, even your stuff. In the end, you're empowering sort of health and safety departments to literally be more caring,
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, I think that's really where our value lies, and like the figuring out all the data points. Unfortunately for the people we work with, they don't really care. They don't value that process as much. So like I have to do a lot of educating on how that process is so valuable, and then quantify the benefits of actually doing that early legwork in the 2 phases, and then getting that end result, which saves them money and also prevents mass scale incidents or even a casualty at work, right? Or when somebody's on the job. So I think those, like, definitely that care aspect is really important, because we have to be as human as possible talking about people's lives, but then also have to be as cold as possible talking about the financial benefits, right? So it's such a fun struggle when I can tell immediately who are the safety managers and the corporate security directors who want more money, who want to know more about the figures and want to know more about their human lives, right? Saved. So it's really crazy, and I think that's something that we're going to start doing more like automated, even in the sales process. So maybe I'll be talking to Balto soon about implementing that. But it really is just prompted questions like how much, like, do they have their finger on their pulse? How much of these incidents are they reporting? How much of these incidents do they know about? How much of the incidents do they actually care about? And you can tell all these things. So like that's really where we see a lot of growth opportunities too, because not every company does the right thing unless there's big brother like OSHA or the Department of Labor on them, like making sure they comply, right? So it's been really fun just learning about that reality and using those incentives, right, the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I'll wrap up the panel because I think we've come to such a great kind of natural conclusion on this. And David, I'll give you the final word, but like, you guys have left me inspired about the possibility of what AI is going to do for St. Louis. It's going to create more caring employees, more opportunities to care in your work is going to create better kind of human connection at work and outside of work. I mean, in you know, to use David's point about like software automates and outsources, or it becomes a proxy for labor. Like actually, what I'm getting from what you guys are saying is like there's a certain amount of like thinking that AI is going to take care of, so we can go back to actually, you know, caring about each other, and that's really inspiring. David, do you want to take us out, close us out?
Yeah, the last thing I'll just leave us with is that I firmly believe that St. Louis has an opportunity to be automating rather than being automated out. And it's important for our leaders and our both political, business, nonprofit, otherwise, to make this the most AI-friendly city in this country. We helped co-found a nonprofit called Prepare AI, sister to Capacity, and the whole goal of the organization is to just get more AI literacy here in St. Louis, get people to meet up, connect, and make sure that we as a city are on the map and leading the charge from an AI perspective. And so I will support red, blue, purple, anything in between. I will support anyone who helps push those initiatives forward. And I really encourage you all to do the same.
Yeah, brilliant. Chris, Ali, David, I wish you great success in helping us build this, but in great success in your companies, and you know, building this AI community in St. Louis is like super cool. You've totally converted me. Thanks for talking at Startup Week. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.